Welcome back to another episode of Stress Less with Dr. SOS. We're continuing with part 3 of our special series called The Talk. In our last episode, we were exposed to some of the aspects of the talk that Black and brown fathers must have with their children, particularly their sons. This week, we consider what it's like to have the talk with our children as moms. While we've explored the concept of the talk with an initial focus on police brutality, as I've thought more and more about my own experiences and the shared experiences of my friends and family, I've been reminded that there's so many layers to the talk that we have to consider. From the hue of our skin to the kinkiness of our hair and the fullness of our lips, the talk is a complex conversation that's rarely held in one sitting, but usually held over time as the world shows itself to be biased in ways that a mother never really wants to have to expose to her child. In part 3 of the talk, I have the pleasure of speaking with 2 of my girlfriends. Angel Brown, owner of Angel Brown Speaks, also director of marketing and corporate relations for Norfolk State University's athletic division, and Charlita Harvey, who is a mompreneur as owner of Design Your Thoughts and supporting her 14-year-old entrepreneur daughter, who is the CEO of It Girl Essentials. Both Angel and Charlie are wives, daughters, sisters, mothers, and Christians. In our discussion, they share some of their experiences as it relates to having the talk with their children and reveal some personal experiences they've had related to racism. I invited Charlita and Angel to be candid in their discussions. In doing so, they provide explicit details. Because our conversation ran for over an hour, I've selected some key responses that I think offer insight into the complexity that racism and racial biases have imposed as burdens on people of color. Please be advised that some racial slurs may be used during this episode. We left them in place to express the social impact as described by those who've had racial epithets thrown at them in an attempt to demean, wound, and intimidate. Let's get started. Did you all watch the video of Mr. George Floyd and what happened?
Yes, I watched the video of George Floyd as best as I could. Mm-hmm. I watched the video of Ahmaud Arbery. I watched the video of a young man who was put in a chokehold on Sunday, Father's Day, at a boardwalk in New York, knowing that chokeholds have been banned. I watched him lose consciousness. I have watched them, yes.
Mm-hmm. I could not honestly bring myself to watch because unfortunately I've seen too many before, and you can't unsee that kind of inhumanity. And I think right, wrong, or indifferent, the media has done an excellent job of describing the 8 minutes and 46 seconds to where I feel like, absent actually seeing it as it plays out in every gut-wrenching moment, I got a good sense of what happened. I've seen still photos that bother me all the more in terms of my opinion of how cavalier Officer Chauvin seemed to be as he was actually taking someone's life. And so, that's the extent of it for me. I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Yeah, I've watched it, and I feel like I fall somewhere between the two of you. I've watched it. I recognize that things have been going on since then, and that because we are so technology savvy now, we have so many ways to pass information along very quickly, and with being able to record things as they're happening, not even record them in as much as witness them live if you happen to be in the right place at the right time. It has been utterly disturbing. It has been utterly disturbing to witness it. It's been disturbing to hear about it. But because we need to have the conversation, and we need to be able to inform our children, and we need to speak from an informed perspective, I felt like part of my responsibility has been to watch it. So in watching it, I know all of us have had very different responses and reactions, just from the emotional to
just the physical. I had a physical response to watching some of the things that I've seen. But one of the things that I haven't heard, general lay people talk about, I've heard Christian leaders talk about it, but not necessarily general lay people, is how our faith, because both of you spoke very directly to the fact that you are believers, that we are believers, and where our faith sits in alignment with what we're seeing. So I would like the two of you to share some of your thoughts about where is your faith sitting as you're watching all of these acts. And unfortunately, George Floyd was not our first, and he's not the last. But I think he was the most visible with the world being so quiet. So I think all of us have had opportunities to either hear about it frequently or to watch it frequently. And so for me, I've thought about where does my faith fit in as I'm seeing what I'm seeing?
Charlie, you want to say that one?
For me, I think if you take it all the way back to Philando Castile's murder being caught on Facebook Live, I did see that. And that shook my faith in a way that I don't think I was prepared for, because although I am never going to stop being a believer, there was that just everyday lay person part of me that went, okay, God, you see this happening. How did you not stop this? Why did you not stop this? To see a man murdered in front of a child, and for that child to have the wherewithal that she's trying to comfort the adults, like that, I think part of that is where my unshakable faith was shaken. Like, I can't believe this is playing out. And so I've had to reconcile my faith enough to remember that God is in all things, and he absolutely will use things for our good, but ... Mm-hmm. What is it going to take for us to get to that place of our good? Mm-hmm. It's a matter of us remembering, as the Bible says, to whom much is given, much is required. Well, it's not just the good things, it's the bad things. So when we witness this, we are required to act. That is where my faith gets reaffirmed. I'm required to act, to inform my children, to reaffirm my husband, et cetera, and so on. So that's kind of where I've landed with this after I had it shaken back then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I always say, he's still working on me. So I have faith, right? And I thank God that I only need the faith the size of a mustard seed, because I'm glad that I have faith, right? Because I love your answer, Charlie, and I wish I could say me too, but me not right now, because my faith was shaken. And I know that God is in control. And yes, I pray, and yes, I believe, and I fast, and I listen, and I understand the teachings, and I teach a ministry, and I'm a part of my ministries at church, and I sit under the wonderful teachings of our bishop. But God's still working on me, mm-hmm. because had Philando been my child, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Had George Floyd, who screamed mama, been my baby, mm-hmm. I'm telling you, Norfolk would not be big enough to hold Angel Brown. That is just where I am. And yes, I do believe that I would have to go to the pearly gates and ask God, I'm sorry. That would have been my conversation to him. I ain't mean no harm, but that's what they did. So for me, spiritually, I know that God is in control. And that's why I have to have that faith, even the size of a mustard seed. Mm-hmm. And I pray that God continues to enlarge and stretch my territory for that reason, because I am not, I walk by faith, but I like to make sure I'm strapped while I'm walking. Mm-hmm. I'm just there.
I love that.
I struggle with that. And I think it's okay as believers to struggle with that, to have that flesh and spiritual pull, that tugging happening. Because again, as a mom, as a wife, when my child and my husband look like he looks like those boys. He looks like those men. He looks like, Ahmaud Arbery. He looks like him. Mm-hmm. So what is the difference? We have prayed for many years In the 50s, we prayed. And in the 60s, we prayed. And in the 70s, we prayed. And I think that God gives us the ability to say, I'm going to give you territory. Mm-hmm. But with that territory comes knowledge and power. Mm-hmm. And you have to now use it. You know, my mom always says, God protects babies and fools. I know which category I'm in. But God, I do. But God has given me
sweet power. Baby.
I'm the baby. Yes, thank you. So God has given all of us power and knowledge, and I think we have to use it. The question is, how do we use it? And we have to use it beyond going in our own prayer closet. But it's now time for us to have conversation and dialogue like we're doing now, and then take that and say, let's expand it. Let's do more than just walk and march. Our brothers need to be out there, yes, in their suits, but their wives, their girlfriends, those backbones need to be standing right beside them.
I've heard a lot of people talking about what happened in the 50s, what happened in the 60s, and the way that we've gone about trying to make change. And I've heard on both sides, you know, that the sit-ins and all the things that happened back then were absolutely necessary. And then I've also heard, you know, well, it's time to do something different now because that got us to a point. So do you all believe that we have seen change, relevant change?
In this recent era, this recent day? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that we have seen a revolution. That's what I think. I think a revolution has happened. I think what we've seen is the difference in the generations that we have now. So my parents marched in the 50s and the 60s. They were a part of that era where it was about having rights, about, you know, drinking out of the same fountain, about, you know, sitting on that same bus wherever they chose to, right? And then my generation was a little bit different. We had affirmative action. Mm-hmm. And so it was one of those, well, we now have opportunities. Yay, us. Well, did we really, or were we just forced on because of? Mm-hmm. But this generation, my son's generation, is different. Because what you notice is there's just as many white, Hispanic, Asians, all ethnicities are now marching for Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. What you're seeing is a revolutionary change, even with NASCAR, where you have Bubba Wallace, who has transformed that sport. Mm-hmm. And even though he had to fight with, you know, a noose hanging in his garage, to see the unity of those around him, mm-hmm. walk with him down the track and push his car to the start line, mm-hmm. that was a revolution. So I think we're starting to see, you know, I have a friend who always says, you know, you're so woke that you have insomnia. So I think we're starting to see more people wake up, but they're waking up not because of what they're seeing, but because they're now looking at it from a different lens. And my child's generation doesn't look at Black or white or Asian, because there's such a melting pot now, mm-hmm. that they look at what's right, what's wrong, mm-hmm. and how do we fix it? Mm-hmm. And that's what I love about this generation. So my job as a parent now is to take my energy and the power that has been given to me now that I'm an adult and help my child maneuver through the energy that he has to ensure that he's doing the right type of protesting, mm-hmm. and having his voice heard. Mm-hmm.
You have any personal frame of reference for experiencing racism or police brutality in any way?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it's been 2 weeks ago now. I had to deal with and help my 14-year-old daughter navigate being called a nigger.
Wow.
And it was, wow. Unfortunately, I wasn't shocked, but I was surprised. And there were two different things at play, because I was, as her mom, trying to help her make sense of the senseless. But for me, it also triggered my own experience as a 16-year-old kid working and having had someone to my face in 1992 call me the N-word, spit in my face and all. And so, you know, for as much as we can say, you know, we've recognized change and, you know, we've evolved and this, that, and the other, as Angel mentioned, there's still, we prayed years and decades and decades and decades ago, and we marched for freedom. And in 2020, we are still marching for the very freedom to exist in the color of our skin. Yeah. And if I were naive enough to not have been woke, which thankfully that's not my testimony, that situation and helping my daughter have to now navigate it, and the emotional impact it had on her, or the physical impact it had on her, reminded me, there's been a seed of change planted with this new generation. But as Angel alluded to, what we're seeing right now play out is a revolution, and it is being televised. And that is the difference. It is absolutely. So people, I think, feel a little bit more empowered to stand up, and, you can't unsee what you have seen. Right. And so if this generation is deciding between, okay, what's right and what's wrong, and where do I fit in all of this, we can't pretend any longer that we don't have a responsibility, regardless of our age. So as Angel said, as moms, as wives, we have a ownership that we must accept, because our children don't have the luxury, nor should they seek it, to be in another skin. Right. They should embrace their brown skin for the beautiful thing that it is, and so, we don't have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines and deciding if and when we will get involved. The very nature of our skin color having been weaponized by society demands that we get involved. And as the parent of a 14-year-old kid who was now reminded of what society does think of her, I have to answer that request. I have to answer that demand and help her navigate, and reminding my son as an 18-year-old young Black male, the importance of his voice and navigating that as well. So yeah, my experience, and then re-experiencing it through her eyes, reaffirmed that for me.
I hope you found our conversation helpful, and that perhaps it promotes healthy conversation between you and your friends and family. There is no right or wrong when it comes to sharing our experiences and working through the pain and the stress that goes hand in hand with racism. What matters most is that we have the conversations, and that we do the work so that we can live well. If you're looking for ways to continue exploring the impact of racism, here are 2 books that I've found helpful. A Collar in My Pocket, The Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes Exercise by Jane Elliott, and Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. Let me leave you with this parting thought. In Gil Scott-Heron's poem and song, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, he spoke to the need for a change to occur in our minds and hearts, as opposed to something that we'll embrace based solely on what we see through the lens of someone else's camera. With that being said, I hope our conversations as a nation challenge all of us to make the changes needed to end racial biases and social injustices for us all. Thank you for watching part 3 of The Talk in our special series of Stress Less with Dr. SOS. Until next time, choose to live well.